Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the Mound Science and Energy Museum Association seminar series. Today's date is August the 28th, 2024, and I'm pleased to have you here at the Mound Cold War Discovery Center in Miamisburg, Ohio. And tonight we're going to have a repeat performer who has been here twice before and given seminars, Chuck Johnson, about history in Dayton, Charles Kettering, and NCR and so forth. We're going to get a repeat today of a new insight and some additional information from Chuck. Now Chuck, I keep feeling over here and I see Kettering looking over my shoulder telling me what to do. So, but Chuck has a voice problem and he may have a little challenge, but we're going to do that and we'll go to plan B if we have to. But again, I want to welcome Chuck Johnson, who actually in his youth, a few decades ago, worked for Charles Kettering. So there is a continuing connection. So Charles, without any further ado, it's yours.
Okay, thank you.
So if you get close, it should work.
I'll get close to the mic. I have to apologize. I woke up this morning with no voice at all. It's better now, so I really called Bob, and he offered to do it for me, but I think I might be able to get through it with the microphone. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. I have to say one other thing. I'm a 20-year survivor of throat cancer, so my voice gets better than this, but not much.
At least you got a voice.
Yes, it's kind of the worst thing to happen to a public speaker. I'm not a singer, can't sing at all, but it's not too good for my voice. Anyway, I've done two other talks here. Mostly, I have talked, most is about Kettering himself, his life, and the things he did. So that's what the other two were about. This one is kind of a little bit different. This one starts with Deeds and Kettering and how they started out with the starter, and then I tried to cover from that time up until GM took them over, and with Bob's permission, I'm going to come back a fourth time. Because this goes up to just as Kettering became VP of research for GM, and he was such an amazing man. He did so much, and I couldn't crowd it all into this one talk. So I'm going to have to come back and start from here and go for the rest of the way. Anyway, as you can see my title, it's in, NCR, of course, I need to remember my own slides. It's, they started at NCR, from NCR to DELCO, and then to General Motors. And a lot of people know, well, when I go through here, a lot of people don't know, DELCO was so successful, they started 5 other companies besides DELCO here in Dayton. Some people may know about it, some people may not, but as I go through it, you'll find out all the different companies they had. So, forgot already.
Oh, you want to go so got it.
There we are. And I start this with Patterson. It's about Deeds and Kettering, but you might wonder, why do I start with Patterson? Because they both worked for John Patterson. And if you know anything about John Patterson, he was an amazing individual himself. So many stories about Patterson, but he was a gifted administrator, a gifted organizer. And what happened, Kettering has several biographies, and he mentions in a couple of his biographies, when he worked for NCR, worked for Deeds, he spent a lot of time with the NCR salespeople. And one thing about Patterson, he's called the father of salesmanship. When he bought NCR, he just brought in all kind of renovations to the things that they were doing. Kettering liked that group because he liked the way they got things done. And going back and recovering.
When did he do this? When did this all start? Give me a date.
Okay, I was just getting, later on, not here, but you'll see a date, because Kettering went to work for NCR around 1904, 1905. What happened? Deeds had an idea. Deeds was an electrical engineer too. Deeds had an idea about electrifying the cash register, because the cash register, of course, worked with current. He had an idea about a motor, but he was also administrator, manager of NCR. He didn't have time to really get into it. So he had a friend at Ohio State, called him and said, "Can you send me an engineer?" Well, it just so happened he sent him Charles Kettering. Charles Kettering, when he graduated, was 25. If you know the story, he had very bad eyesight. So he went into Ohio State a couple of times, but he finally graduated. He finally went back at 25, graduated, he was 28, pretty old for a graduate. But when he came down, he actually didn't want to come down to Dayton. He already had a job with the Central Ohio Telephone Company. But the professor convinced him, said they're doing great things. You need to go down and at least talk to them. Kettering came down, met Deeds, and they clicked. They both liked each other, they got together, and so Kettering became head. There's Colonel Deeds, was NCR general manager at the time, very busy. Kettering was put in charge of the inventions department because of his knowledge and his inventive mind. So he was put in charge of the inventions department. So Deeds and Kettering worked at NCR during the day. At night and at home, Deeds had, it's called a barn. It was actually a carriage house in the back. Deeds had that, but he had a workshop upstairs. And so he and Kettering started taking it around. The first thing they did, and automobiles that time, if you didn't know, automobiles were very popular in Dayton. At one time, Dayton had almost a dozen automobile manufacturers. And it wasn't just in Dayton, all over the country. People were becoming enamored of the horseless carriage. One of the bad things about it, they used the magneto to start, and it wore batteries out, dry cell batteries very quickly. And and it didn't have, Kettering had an idea about a system, because he was very familiar from his work with telephone systems, of a system to get rid of doing just a whole series of sparks, which ran the battery down. He got into setting up a relay on a coil so that only one very good spark came out, so it saved the batteries. He started working on the ignition system. He perfected the ignition system, got a patent on it, took the ignition system to Detroit, went to the Cadillac company. Cadillac loved it and ordered 5,000 of them. Thing about Kettering and Deeds, all Deeds had was a whole workshop. They had a patent on the ignition system, but all they had was a whole workshop. And really, when they started out, they really didn't, they wanted to stay in a laboratory. They didn't want to do in the manufacturing. They had a difficult time of finding someone to do it. They found someone to do it. They had ordered 5,000, so One of the things Deeds said to Kettering, looks like we're gonna have to start a company. And they started a company, Dayton Engineering Laboratory Company. And the reason they kept laboratory in there, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to invent things, they didn't want to manufacture. But with a contract for 5,000 ignition systems for the next year, so they started that. They got it ready for the 1912 Cadillac for 5,000. And that was, started to do that. They started DELCO, and DELCO became very, very successful. Because all of these cars were not doing very well running long distances, the ignition system was great. What happened, Henry Leland was a General Motors guy at the time. That's who DELCO was doing the ignition systems for. Henry Leland had a friend, and cranking the car was very difficult and very dangerous. He had a friend that actually got a broken jaw and died. So he put the job to Kettering and Deeds. We need to develop a crank for the car. And one of the things about that, really, a lot of people were doing different things, different kinds of ways to do a crank. Kettering got to wait on it, maybe in about a year or two. They developed a working starter, got a patent on it, and they looked around again for a company. No one wanted to touch it. It was something new, a fad. They didn't want to touch it. It was going to take a lot of money to get started. So Kettering and Deeds decided to do it themselves. So they actually they actually got some money. They mortgaged everything, got a lot of money, bought the equipment to do it, started manufacturing these ignition systems and the self-starter. They rented a space at downtown in Dayton. As a matter of fact, that building is still there. It's the Beaver Power Building. Does anyone know what that building is? Who out here knows? It's downtown in Dayton, it's still there. Okay? It's actually the St. Clair Lofts. So the St. Clair Lofts at 4th and St. Clair was a Beaver Power Building. They rented space and started doing it. Very successful. And I go back just a little bit. That's Deeds Barn. Deeds Barn is where Deeds had his workshop. And so actually a number of other people joined him, all from NCR. His whole inventions department at one time or another ended up being there with them. And they were working all hours, nights, after they got off work from NCR. And you might want to know, little aside, why in the world did they call it the Barn Gang? What would happen, they would work all hours through the night, they would fix something up on the car, roll down the door and go roaring down the alley. Car backfiring, everything. Well, it was in a residential neighborhood, right off of Central Avenue in Dayton. Neighbors would say, there goes that gang again over at the barn. It's an anecdotal story, I don't know how true it is. That's where Barn Gang came from. It's still there because I'm there every Tuesday and Saturday volunteering, so. Okay, so they developed the self-starter. The self-starter worked, and Cadillac wanted to do it for the 1912 Cadillac, and that's a 1912 Cadillac. 1912 Cadillac had a self-starter, and I got another The self-starter was really, all the other car, people wanted it too. Lots and lots of people wanted self-starters. And the thing about that, self-starter was so successful. When Cadillac came out with the self-starter, their sales doubled. They almost, and 2 or 3 months later, they were doubling their sales. At one point, with the self-starter, and that was the Beaver Power Building where they got on the 4th floor. And they actually ended up getting the whole building. It was so successful. They started out on the 4th floor and had the whole building. The self-starter at DELCO Products was so successful, they needed another building. So the guy that built that was Fred Beaver. This is Beaver Power Building 1. Itself was St. Clair Loss is still there. And this was, they were so successful that they built another plant. This is Beaver Power, this is DELCO Plant 1. DELCO Plant 1 actually is still there too. It's DELCO Loss, if you're familiar with downtown. Company just, and it's now commercial and lofts, apartments and lofts. It's kind of interesting if you think about where they started out with the Beaver Power Building. All the buildings of DELCO are still there and have been converted to apartments. That's actually Beaver Power Building number 2 is actually DELCO Building 1. I put this in here. A lot of this stuff comes out of the Kettering archives. This is just one example. If you see this is just one example. There we are. This is just one example, and it's a manual that they have. This is 1916 and 1917. Just say they got the first contract in 1912. All of these different ones, you may not be able to see it from there, but these are all different companies. They're all different companies that had the DELCO starter in them. They had about 95, General Motors had about 95% of the cars manufactured, and they had self-starters. So that's how successful it was. Now, the reason I mention this, that's why DELCO is so successful. This is 1916 and 1917. So in 4 years, I'm not talking about hundreds of cars, they got up to 1 million cars by the time 4 years were around because of the self-starter. And this, let me see if I can go back. I'll go back to that and show you. This is DELCO plant number 1. But this also here, they were so successful. That building I showed you was 4 floors. This is 6 floors. Still there. It's DELCO lost, but they were making so much money off of DELCO, needed more space, didn't build another building, added 2 floors to the building. And if you go look at DELCO loss now, you'll see that it's 6 floors, not 4 floors. I put this on, this is a sandboard map. It just shows that, here, building number 1, Dayton Engineering Laboratory Company. And you can see here, Beaver Power Building number 2, still by the Beaver, by Fred Beaver. I put this over, it's another sandboard map. Here is building number 1 again. But if you look up here, you can't read it. This is the Domestic Engineering Company, another company that they started, one of the other companies they started, very close to the DELCO products. Over there, around the ballpark, all of those buildings at one time or another were connected with Deeds and Kettering. I put this in, this is actually the same place there. This is DELCO products. They end up having 3 plants. This is building number 1, for what I just showed you. This is building number 2, which is the DELCO. This is DELCO Loss. This is the DELCO, again, which has just been converted to commercial and also to apartments. This was plant number 3. This was built in 1926. And actually, I can tell you now, it was still DELCO, but it wasn't DELCO products. By this time, GM was doing all of this business. And this plant was torn down, and the Dragon Stadium was put there some time ago. This building was torn down when the Dragon Stadium was put in. This building, you probably know, became Mendelssohn's Outlet Center. And it stayed Mendelssohn's for almost 40 years, and just this last year, it was converted into Loss and called the DELCO. The other thing, while Kettering was doing that, working on DELCO projects, he also developed the Domestic Engineering Company, DELCO Light. He got a patent on that. The first portable electric generator invented by Kettering was placed on the market in 1914. Thousands of DELCO farm lights were sold nationwide because there was no rural electrification, there was no electric. So he developed a portable electric generator. They were able to go to farms, and now farms had portable electricity. Interesting thing about General Motors, and when they had DELCO lights, the other companies started developing. Once they had electricity, they followed about 2 or 3 months later and were selling electric appliances. So stoves, coolers, fans, everything, refrigerators, after they had electric. So they had a built-in market with the DELCO electric light generator. This next one, the DELCO light, had in 1919, this is some years after it was developed, they had a convention in Dayton. It was a national convention. And their national convention, this is the program, and a little small to read, but up here, it was developing engineering. C.F. Kettering was a talker. C.F. Kettering was a talker. This is a program, it was a convention, and this was the program. The next day, and this was a convention also, with a lot of companies coming in. This was the DELCO Light convention, and you can't read it from there, but these are distributors that were selling DELCO Light. The DELCO Light distributors, if you read this, all over the country. So it just wasn't Dayton, Ohio. They were selling DELCO Light all over the country. Now, the other thing they were doing, again, with the profits from the DELCO Products Company, they started the Dayton Metal Products Company. It was established to manufacture auto items, auto accessories. It manufactured many items for other Kettering companies. About this same time, World War I started. And all of these companies that were in Dayton, other companies too, they ended up getting government contracts, all of them. And World War I ended up making a big boom of Dayton industry. The other thing now, with World War I, there also became a need for airplanes, for aviation. It was formed by Deeds, Kettering, Orville Wright, and H.R. Talbot. It also received later orders from General Motors about that time. And it was so successful during World War I, a lot of people don't know that, those 3,500 of those British planes were built right here in Dayton. And actually Dayton built 3,500 of the 4,500 total used in the war. It was eventually absorbed into General Motors. This will go back just a little bit. Before they were absorbed into General Motors, all I can tell you today, we'll go into a little later, 1919, General Motors took in all of those companies, Kettering's companies. But they had another company, Dayton Motor and Fan Company, established by Deeds and Kettering to manufacture, again, automotive, small electric motors and fans. William Durant, and I have a funny story maybe it's a funny story, maybe there's some people here already. Does anyone know who Durant was? This is a funny story. Because I was, when I was doing this talk earlier for one of the DELCO buildings, by the way, we had about 80 people in there. And I always do that. I said, okay, does anyone know who William Durant was? One guy raised his hand. I said, you know who he is? Yeah. And after it was over, out of 80 people, I said, how did you know who Durant was? He said, I'm from Flint. Well, the thing about Flint was from Flint, Michigan, and he started a motor company. He started United Motor Companies, all these companies. Well, let me go another one to show you. Here, he started all these companies. And now he had an idea for starting with everyone building automobiles and all these automobiles. All of these companies he bought. He didn't start them, but they were already started. But they were parts companies. And he actually bought stock, everything, money. He bought all of them and formed the United Motor System. And during that time, buying these companies, he also bought Dayton Engineering Laboratories, 1960. So he had all of these companies making money, going around and building auto parts. Well, GM by that time had several different models and got interested in parts, wanted to set up their own part system. So General Motors, and the time on that, I put this on here to show all of these, this Durant was buying all of these companies, and he bought Dayton Engineering Laboratory 1960. So that was an overlap. He started buying these companies in 1904. And he bought all these companies between 1994 and 1919. And he bought Dayton Engineering Laboratories in 1960. And in 1960, well, there's another. Henry Leland, I put some of these in there because Henry Leland later on became president of General Motors also. He was also, he was from one of the companies, I think it was from the, I don't know, I had it on there. he might have been from the Hyatt Roller Bearing Company. He was president of that. And then he became, when Durant bought him, he became vice president of General Motors. General Motors was interested in the parts company. They purchased United Motive Service in September 1919 to provide parts and service to several automobile brands. That purchase, of course, included Dayton Engineering Laboratories, DELCO. Subsequently, when they bought that, Deeds and Kettering became involved with General Motors and not with DELCO. I don't have that really detailed here, but DELCO from 1920 on was run by General Motors, not by Deeds and Kettering. They were still indirectly involved, but Kettering was appointed Vice President of Research for General Motors. He went there in 1920. He stayed there until 1947 as director of General Motors Research. Because when they got DELCO, they saw how brilliant Kettering was. And so they set up a different division for him, the research. All of their automotive research for the next 27 years, Kettering had her hand in. In my mind, I don't have it detailed. That's also why, as Kettering Research, he had a lot to do with the number of Dayton companies, number of Dayton factories from GM. And some of you have been around long enough, used to know we had many GM factories here. Can't believe it so soon. I'm giving a talk tomorrow about where I'm going to. I've invited a GM, a retiree from one of the plants, actually had been involved. He's a retiree of General Motors, but had been involved in the plants. But anyway, it didn't hurt that Kettering became vice president for the economy of Dayton and all the plants. Oh, okay. That's the research building in General Motors. That's the research lab of where Kettering was there for the next 27 years. One thing I can mention about Kettering, I'm trying to give you an idea of where General Motors fit in this scheme of DELCO products. That Kettering's inventive genius and where General Motors was going with automotive research, Kettering, even while he was there, and this is, I've already talked to Bob, I've got to come back. I've got to come back for another, because it's an involved story. It's really interesting about General Motors. They bought United Motor Systems, but when they did that, they got DELCO, and they also got. So I think it was a real good deal for them. They also got Kettering, and but Kettering, this is another story entirely. Kettering went to work there in the 1920s. I've got it in other talks. He never stopped working outside of General Motors. He was still doing an awful lot of work. The man was, you were amazing. The man was just amazing because he was still doing automotive research, but he was starting all of these other laboratories to do stuff he was interested in. Non-automotive research, photosynthesis, what makes the grass green. That's the laboratory I eventually ended up working in. I've got a guest here who also worked in it. Mike Hall also spent 10 years, much later than me, but spent 10 years at the Kettering Lab in Yellow Spring, somewhat doing the same thing I have been doing there. Electronics support for all of the laboratory. He was also interested in magnetism. Hard, another individual in the 30s who just recently deceased, also worked for General Motors in Kettering for 40 years. Laboratories all over the country. Cancer research, and I didn't work on photosynthesis, but I did work on those last three. Cancer research and renewable energy. The renewable energy part, Mike Hall just worked on it with me too. In that laboratory in 1958, I worked on wind research. At that time, with everything Kettering had done before, he was now interested in renewable energy. And I always thought that was interesting. He built the first portable electric generator to develop electricity. Now he's looking into a windmill to do the same thing, not using batteries, but the wind. Think how much people are looking at wind now. Well, I finally found out the windmill that I worked on was still around. There was and I've been looking, and I have to tell you, I retired from Wright Pack in 2001. I can't believe how long ago that's been. It's 23 years. I've been doing Kettering research for that time. And I've got two of those manuals over there have a lot of Kettering information in them, artifacts, storage, everything. I've got 15 of those filled of information about Kettering. And I don't have the discipline. I'm supposed to be writing a book on it, but it's been about 10 years ago. Does anyone, how many people, well, this is a part of Caroline Park. Does anyone know much about Caroline Park?
Yeah.
Does anyone know the name Kurt Dalton?
Yes.
The guy writes a book every month. I am so jealous. When I go into the bookstore, all I see is Kurt Dalton's names. And I still want to get that. I've got the information to do it. I just need to get it down on paper. Okay, I'm getting close to the end. When I do these talks, my wife has a favorite statement. I don't know whether you've ever heard it or not. You read my last talk.
Right.
It said, "Don't get him started." And I belong to Preservation Dayton. I did the talk for them. And one of my fellow members there sat in one of my early talks. And when I did the talk here, I only heard it a certain amount of time. He kept telling me, "Remember, you've only got 20 minutes. And he just kept telling me that. But anyway, these are Kettering research advancements, not necessarily automotive, but Freon for refrigeration. Now, he and a couple other guys developed Freon for refrigeration. It doesn't get as much play, but in my mind, I think that's as big a thing for the economy in the country to get refrigerators, to be able to do refrigerators. Think of all the train, trucks, everything with refrigeration, homes, the home air conditioning. That's another thing attributed to Kettering. What originally Terrace was air conditioned in 1914. The air conditioned its own at that time. All these others, I won't go through all of them. I've got the dates on them, when he designed it and when he got a patent on it. I talked about how big refrigeration was. That last one was a big thing too, the two-cycle diesel engine. The two-cycle diesel engine, I don't have it in this talk, but have I got a few more minutes?
Yeah.
That's
Sure, go ahead.
That was a reluctant yes, but it's okay.
I'm remembering your wife saying, so I'm trying not to encourage you too much.
But the two-cycle diesel engine, it's in my other talk, but I have to talk about it. Kettering in 1929 bought a yacht and named it after his wife. It was called the Olive K1. It was an ocean-going yacht. Had a crew of 10. He could take 30 people on ocean-going trips. And he bought it in, I think, April or June he bought it. $500,000. He sent it back, and he was never around when people looked for him. He was always in the engineering room. Tuxedo on, dirty, sludge, everything. He didn't like he bought it from the Dayton Engineering Company. He didn't like the motor. He sent it back with a two-cycle design engine he designed and got a patent on. Bought another one, and it was his design of the engine. I had to leave it in my next. This is an amazing story. He got appointed Vice President of Research for General Motors. He convinced General Motors to buy this Dayton Engineering Company. And they put two-cycle diesel engines in it. Another railroad company, they put a diesel engine in there. And that's why we ended up with diesel. That's a major thing. That's why we don't have steam engines anymore. Anyway, those are just some other things. He had over 300 patents when he died. There was only one American that had more patents. People probably know it was Edison.
Thomas Edison.
He had more. Okay, I put Alfred Sloan in there because he was someone that Kettering was involved with also. And he ended up becoming a vice president at one time, CEO, board chairman of GM. I put all this in there because Sloan, I know you all have heard Sloan Kettering. Sloan was a very wealthy man also. He and Kettering got together and started Sloan Kettering because Kettering was also interested in cancer research. He also became board chairman of GM. Okay, that's the end at last. But I've got something else here.
You got a bonus for us, don't you?
I've got a bonus for you, and it's something personal. I mean, I got to get something out of one of them.
Sure.
Cameron, he didn't leave me any money. I have to tell you one thing about this gentleman too. He died in 1958. While I was working for him, he died in 1958. He left $175,000 to 7 of his relatives. Left his home to his son. Left $200 million to the Kettering Foundation. Anybody got any idea what $200 million is worth in 1958? To give an idea about Kettering and a comparison, Deeds, who was also a millionaire and very smart man, his estate was $15 million. $200 million. And the reason he got most of that, I'm sure, is because he was vice president of General Motors and a very smart man. But that was amazing. Okay, something else. And I put this in when I did a talk for this big company here. Big company that did DELCO Loft. I did sneak peek, a talk called Sneak Peek to when they were just opening up. And we put advertising in for my talk about a month ahead of time. In 2 weeks, we sold out 80 people, which was pretty happy for. I think we may have almost 80 people here. Anyway, here, let's go. Let's get started. Okay, there's a laboratory that Kettering built in 1952, completely paid for, salaries and everything. That's where I went to work. I actually went to work there. I had a degree in chemistry from Central State College. I went there to become a chemist. They had so many PhD chemists there, they didn't need my little bachelor's. But they did have an opening in the engineering department, which I took, and never did a day's chemistry in my life. But I did do an awful lot of engineering. Working for Kettering was like going to grad school. Believe me, I worked for him until he died. And I made it to the laboratory for 6 years and then I left. You made it to 10 years?
10 years.
Okay. A nice place to work, really. But okay. One of the things I worked on, renewable energy, that's a windmill. That's the windmill that was on top of the building. I don't know whether I probably don't have it. It's up in the, you had to climb up a ladder. Kettering used to go up a ladder to work on this and take measurements himself. Okay, right here, over there, that is a windmill, one of the blades from the windmill.
Let me walk over a second. I'll get it out.
That's one of the blades. It was a 3-bladed propeller. My call helped me get it from this collector. Took me years to locate this. Actually, we found 3 blades, and they had 3 replacement blades also, so I've got all 6 blades. But we also have the generator. There's a generator on that, 32-volt DC generator. We got the generator too. And I had to tell you, from this collector to get it stored away, to move the generator took a forklift. That's how big it was. Mike was with me the day we got all that. But I know with the laboratory, that laboratory closed in 1988. I don't know when they took the windmill down. But this collector is amazing. He had everything. Just to give you an idea of the breadth of what he had 2 old fire engines, had a complete trolley bus. All this was on a farm in Yellow Springs. Had 3 player pianos, 2 organs. Anything else weird he had?
7 MGs.
What?
Little cars. 7 little MGs, little cars.
I didn't know he had that.
Oh, the collector's key got him after.
And he's also had 2 old fire engines. But it was made anyway. I don't know whether you could hear. I'm going to walk away from this. Maybe I can talk loud enough to hear. I'm going to walk over here because I'll try to speak a little longer. Not only did this collector have all of this stuff, everything you could think of. Well, what was that big crane he had?
Oh, it was a drag line from strip mining coal.
A drag line he had. And, but also what he had was boxes and boxes and boxes of trains, train engines. Train engines, I have a little home thing, HO, that's hardly anything. But he had things like this.
Oh, yeah.
And this thing is heavy. This is a 1929 Lionel engine. It's a Lionel 390E engine. He's got all the cars with this. I've got 25 engines. Not as fancy as this. But anyway, I'm working with, this is worth a lot of money. Lionel run a company out of business. They ran a company called Ives. Anyone heard of Ives? They stopped running in the 40s, I think. But Lionel run them out of business. I've got an Ives original train. Oh, and the other thing that makes this valuable, it's in the original boxes. Both of these trains are in the original boxes. Anyway, I just wanted to point out how amazing the kind of things that I run into in researching stuff for Kettering. And well, I'll be through here in a second. I just have to say this. I hope he doesn't kill me for doing this. I'll leave this out on the table, and anyone that wants to take a look at it can come up. I'll leave it on the table here. This is Mike Hall, just to prove that he was there helping me. This is the collector. This is the man. This is the collector that died. I had a chance to interview him. He was it 99?
He died in, I think, January at 99, so.
He was 99.
Fall before.
Unfortunately, I was able to talk to him once. He died the next week. Kind of makes me emotional. But anyway, oh, I'm going to leave this here. Okay.
So Chuck, do you have anything else you want to cover?
Let me finish.
Okay.
The point of this whole thing.
Yeah, the point of this whole thing was.
That's more. That's all the mechanism of the windmill. There are the blades. I've got one of them. I didn't want to bring them all. And then the DELCO. I want that reconditioned and put on the DELCO building. It's a Kettering building, and it's a Kettering building. Wouldn't it look great right here? Right here, underneath the big modern thing, right here and running. It would be, and you can see this, I've already checked this, you can see this all over downtown. And it would be amazing thing. Okay, what I'm gonna do. Well, I'm gonna put some cards out here. My email is on this. And what I would like people to do, if you're interested enough, I'm trying to put enough people together who would be interested in something like that. And if people will email me, I'll keep track of all of them, and I will write back. I also have some other stuff here. I'll have out whoever wants to look at it. That's why it takes so long to do anything.
Here, I'll take them out for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me see on this.
Those?
Oh, I know, I don't need it. I just leave it out to people.
Okay, I'll have them out.
Okay, I'm through at last.